Okay, just making sure this recorder's on. I'm using a new device. I've heard you. I've heard all of you talk about my lack of ability as a videographer. What do you call it? Well, anyway, I'm not real good at it. So I'm trying a different device, and hopefully it won't be as shaky. Yes, I've heard you, the music and the loops, it even annoyed me. So yes, you have been heard. Thank you for all of your feedback, and thank you very much to those of you who even offered to help me sort this stuff out. So, I was in the UK at the beginning of December, and I went over there to do some of my own studies and investigations with afterlife contact and communication. And when I came home, I was going through some of my email, and I took a trip over to my YouTube channel, and I noticed that 61,000 of you actually took a peek at one specific email. Not email, video, I'm sorry. And that video discussed life after death, and what was life after death, and what did it look like. And I was amazed, absolutely amazed, because I hadn't really checked it. I looked at the other videos, and there are a bunch of them, but those were not nearly as popular. I know that in those other videos I talk about mediumship and more experiential things. There are a couple of them on suicide, which also have received quite a bit of traffic, but mostly it was this one particular video. And so I always forget what I have taped, and so I took a look at it, and after taking a look at it, I clearly understood that there is a real need for information about, and not just accounts about people who have had experiences like near-death encounters where there has been the sensation of leaving the body, seeing a bright light, possibly traveling through a tunnel. When I had a near-death experience, I did not experience that, nor did my husband when he had his near-death experience. Finding ourselves in a colorful environment, looking for deceased relatives and loved ones, or meeting up with deceased loved ones, having a glimpse of what the afterlife looks like, recognizing we're not going to be sitting on a cloud, strumming a harp, but that we're going to actually continue the journey and learn. Or the after-death communication, where someone comes to visit us in a dream who has moved on, and they have come for the specific purpose to let us know that they are okay, and that they want us to know that we are loved. Or some individuals can actually have a full manifestation where a deceased individual comes in energy form or shows themselves to us as we last saw them, or when they were younger in youth. They show us when they were healthy and happy. Or we can have the departing vision or the deathbed vision, which is probably the most common experience, where we can be sitting at the bedside of a loved one, and suddenly our loved one begins to talk about seeing and talking with those in an afterlife environment. We may not see who it is they're talking to, typically we don't, but our loved one who may have been in a coma suddenly wakes up, and then they begin conversing with us, and at the same time they're talking to somebody else. And the express purpose of the departing vision is that someone from an afterlife environment comes along and visits someone who's getting ready to cross, and is there to escort them to whatever dimension awaits us. And then of course there are premonitions, where people will have dreams or visions or sensations about car accidents or 9/11. There were thousands of people who had premonitions about buildings burning, and people dying and jumping out of buildings, and all of that is documented. We can have premonitions about natural disasters that are about to take place. So the bottom line is that I recognize that you don't want specific accounts, descriptions of accounts. A few are okay, but what lots of you want is you want some information, some hard, cold information. And so that's what I'd like to give you today. I was, last weekend, I was in Dallas where I presented before the International Association of Near-Death Studies in Dallas. And it was a very interesting group. There were people who had brushes with death, and they had left their bodies, and they had met up with deceased relatives and loved ones and come back to talk about it. But what a lot of folks don't know is that the International Association for Near-Death Studies has been around for decades. I went to my first conference 30 years ago when I was in the process of trying to see what was out there. And what I discovered was that there were bona fide researchers actually investigating these experiences. These were university professors, psychiatrists, an astronaut was involved. But what they did is these individuals, separately and together, they did statistical analysis research. There's a guy in England who was also a part of this. Bruce Grayson at the University of Virginia. And of course Edgar Mitchell, he was on the ground floor. My agent John White, and other well-known researchers. Dr. Jan Holden also has done numerous research investigations into the near-death experience, and she continues to do research today. I actually had dinner with her this last weekend. So there is a ton of bona fide information out there on the near-death experience. And for you statistics hounds, yes, it has been quantitatively investigated with interviews and with cross-cultural studies, and with the phenomenon can be found in absolutely every single country. Then we have what are called the after-death communications, after-death contact. There are individuals who research these, who take a look at it. And the common denominator with the after-death contact is that the visitation, either in a dream, face-to-face, or through sensation, is something that imprints on us. It's something that we don't forget. It's something that feels so incredibly real for us. There's a difference between being triggered, having a memory about a deceased loved one, and being triggered by a song on the radio or a smell. Like a lot of times if I'm cooking Russian food in my kitchen, I will receive a trigger where I will have a memory about my grandmother teaching me how to make this food, and there will be some emotions associated with this. That's a totally different experience. I'm talking about out of the blue, completely out of the blue, unexpected. There is this sensation that somebody is with us, and we know somebody is with us, and we even know who is with us. And it might be somebody we haven't thought about in years, maybe in decades, and then suddenly we have this sensation. Some of us even experience a drop of temperature in the room. We may feel somebody touching our face or touching the top of our head. And so these experiences have also been collected from around the world, and they have been statistically analyzed also. So there's some great research out there. There's some great books out there. And so you can get a lot of information, concrete, solid information about the investigations that have taken place with the after-death contact experience. You can also research near-death experiences and after-death contact experience, back through history, every major form of religion, all the doctrine, all of the material written, from the Bible to the Quran to you name it, there are accounts of these experiences. And the thing that's so interesting and what's most important for you to recognize is that these experiences are incredibly similar to many of the modern day experiences that are being reported now. And of course we have what was called the deathbed vision, but now I call it the departing vision. The experience where we're sitting at the bedside and then suddenly we might see something standing in the doorway to the room of our loved one who's getting ready to cross over. We might sense something. We might sense a drop in temperature in the room. We might smell something that's familiar to that person, a tobacco scent when nobody's smoking, or a particular perfume when nobody in the room is wearing that perfume. So we can have these experiences, and a lot of us brush this stuff away. And we also brush away those experiences that our loved ones are having when they tell us that they're talking to someone who is on the other side. I need to say this one more time. I've said it a gazillion times. If 10 people come into my office and they are all suffering from hallucinations, each hallucination is going to be different and specific to that individual. If 10 people come into my office and they have had departing visions, there will be commonalities between all 10 of them. It doesn't matter if they're from Japan, Israel, Italy, Scotland, Canada, Japan, South Africa. It's not going to matter. And I have all of that data right here, right here in this file that I'm sitting above. So these accounts are universal. They're absolutely universal. And early researchers began to discover that individuals could have departing visions. They could be in the process of physically dying themselves and know about somebody who had already passed before anybody told them. They would see the individual who had passed, who they had not been told about. They would see that individual in the room with them. Also, people can have what are called empathetic experiences, where they have an experience where not only is their loved one who's getting ready to cross over seeing deceased relatives in some sort of afterlife environment, but they too can see these relatives. An individual can suddenly start experiencing chest pains in another part of the country or the world, and then come to find out that while they were feeling chest pains, a loved one or a friend crossed over and passed because of a heart attack. And of course we have premonitions. I can't tell you how much research has been done on premonitions. Just Google premonitions, World Trade Center terrorist attack, statistical analysis, research and study. And you're going to get all sorts of information. So this is information for those of you who are still somewhat skeptical. I know that Hollywood and the media has begun incorporating these accounts into their movies and their television shows, and even some radio programming. And sometimes it can sound kind of funky and flighty and sort of silly. And so that turns a lot of folks off. And it keeps them from really taking a look at the reality of these encounters. There's something going on, and this has been going on for centuries. This isn't new information. I think that we have more exposure to it now because finally people are talking about it. As I've said so many times, before the Industrial Revolution, these accounts were seen as a normal, everyday part of life. They weren't seen as witchery or superstitious thinking or part of church doctrine. They were actually just seen as part of the cycle of life, and nobody made a really big deal about it. It wasn't until the Industrial Revolution, when materialism took over and things became more important than people, which is the natural progression of any society, that church doctrine or activities such as after physical death contact all became relegated to superstition. You know, the communists, what they did is they got rid of all churches. They put their thumb down on the Orthodox Church. They saw that as superstition. And also they saw that as, basically financially, they were getting a little jealous because these churches were collecting a lot of cash. And so religion became it was the opiate of the masses. And comments about people could actually get in trouble in certain countries if they practiced a form of religion, if that religion financially or emotionally was a threat to the governing body. So there were Jews in Spain who had to practice Judaism in basements and with the curtains drawn because the aristocrats at the time, they were Catholic, and so either you converted to Catholicism or what happened was that you were executed. So there's a lot of psychology with why we are so resistant to intellectually looking at this stuff. We don't have to be an experiencer. We can research. Lots of people send me emails and they send me messages on Facebook or on YouTube and they ask me questions. They want to know where they can go because they are learning with intellectualism about life after physical life. And what I do is I can direct them to my friend in Russia who has been researching and investigating what happens energy-wise when we physically cross over, when we're physically not in, our consciousness leaves and it's no longer in the physical body. Very interesting stuff. Light After Life, that's the name of his book. It's been translated into English and it's a bit of a difficult read, but it's some really good stuff. Two famous deathbed vision researchers, Carlos Osis and Erlinger Haraldson, wrote a wonderful book on departing visions called At the Hour of Death. And then that was followed by more research in Holland and in the Netherlands by a couple of researchers who statistically analyzed accounts that they had collected from hospice centers and nursing homes. So there is lots of concrete stuff out there. If you're feeling put off by the stories that people tell about their accounts and you're having a hard time trusting what you're hearing, it's okay. Skepticism is not a bad thing. Go ahead and take a look at some of the research. Look at some of the hardcore science that's out there. You can go to the International Association for Near-Death Studies and you can join that organization. They put out a journal several times a year, and it's full of research information. You can go to their site and you can find research information. So it's out there, gang. All you have to do is go look for it. Based on just the research alone, if I hadn't had any experiences of my own, any contact of my own, based on the research alone, I would be convinced. I would be convinced that there is something to this idea that consciousness is not brain-made, that consciousness is separate from the physical, and that when people experience near-death experiences and they are flatlining, that there is consciousness that can still see what's going on. Some woman shared with me, I will share a couple of accounts. She shared how when she had died, she was out of her body and she heard what the nurses and surgeons were saying. And then she actually moved to the waiting room and heard everything that her family and friends were talking about, the tears, the fears, and was able to report this back. So that's just one account. Or the individual who came in an after-death communication, after-death contact in dream form and told a woman where a piece of jewelry was that she totally had no awareness of, but was told, here is this piece of jewelry, and showed this to her in a dream, and then showed her where it was, and she was able to go find this piece of jewelry. So there are these accounts also, which are very, very hard to make sense out of. It's really hard to, when we hear about someone who has an experience with a departing vision, and they see their loved one laying on the bed talking to somebody who has moved on, but nobody has shared this information with them, and there's no possible way they could know. So, don't throw out the accounts, but use your skepticism to decide what it is you see on television, what it is you read on books, what it is you see in movie, whether or not you feel in your gut that's real or not. That's your job, to decide if you feel whether or not that's real or not. And then go ahead. The intellectual variety is fine. You don't have to be an experiencer. So I hope I've helped a little bit. I'm going to go take off and take care of some business, and I'm hoping that all of you have a wonderful rest of the week. And please feel free to call me at my office number, which you can find on my webpage, which is www.carla with a C, C-A-R-L-A, Wills, W-I-L-L-S, Brandon, BRANDON.com. You can also find me on Facebook under Authors Digs. Just search that, or Carla Wills Brandon, that's another page, or Afterlife, Deathbed Visions, that'll pull up another page. That page is full of information. For anybody who is Jewish, I am putting together information and research on Jews who have these encounters. There's this strong belief within the public that Jews don't believe in an afterlife, which is very, very far from the truth. The reality is that before the Holocaust, these experiences were seen as a part of life. They weren't seen as anything that totally unusual. They can be found in historical doctrine. But then the Holocaust came along, and anytime there is a mass tragedy, the question that's always asked when there are so many deaths is, if there was a God, why did this have to happen? So what that does is that closes the door to expressing and discussing these sorts of experiences. But believe me, Jews do have these encounters. So there is a Jewish Afterlife page on Facebook that is dedicated to taking a look at that. And as usual, there's my YouTube. Just search Carla Wills Brandon. And for those of you who are book readers, you can buy my paperbacks used for 99 cents. No excuse. And I don't even make a dime off that. So you can go get a book. So from my house to yours, have an enjoyable rest of the week. And remember, you are your best investigator.